between some history and I guess how things used to be and how things are today, especially when we do powwows and gatherings. And I didn't know I was doing this presentation. I think Tuesday I found out. And those of you who don't know, I just got home on. My wife just had a baby, so I was preemie. She's a preemie 7 weeks early. We've been living in a hospital for 2 weeks, and we just got home Monday. So it was kind of. I went to go see Giselle, and Giselle was like, "Yeah, you're supposed to be doing a presentation on Friday." I'm like, "Okay, what, really?" And she was like, "Yeah, she was supposed to be doing a presentation." And so she looked up the schedule. Look, I'm like, but last year I did a similar presentation last year for Louis Sultanesh at in Ascazoni, and was it 2 years ago? Yeah. 2 years ago. So that last year. So that's a little bit about this presentation. A little bit about myself. Like I said, I'm a relatively young man. I'm definitely nowhere near elder status. Nowhere near that. What I do know is I like to acknowledge a lot of people who taught me throughout the years as well. I guess in the last 10 years or so, I've been doing a lot of emceeing powwows in our territory. I've gone emceeing powwows as far as I guess I did Wemotashi 1 year, which is about maybe a 16-hour drive from here, up in central Quebec. Dirt road, almost 200 clicks on the dirt road before I get to the city. So I MC dirt powwow, and then I do vocal around here from Newfoundland all the way to Quebec. I do a lot of MC and powwows. But I'm also one of our lead singer for Stony Bear Singers out of Escazoni, and that's kind of what I've been doing quite a bit in the last since '92, anyways. My first powwow I went to was the Mashpee Wampanoag powwow in 91 maybe. I was hanging out with my aunt used to live there locally, so I guess almost my whole life I've been going to powwows and or singing or dancing and especially doing the protocol behind organizing powwows and organizing the ceremonial aspects of powwow as well. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. And I do apologize. I usually have a PowerPoint, and just because it was such short notice and I had no time at all to do this. I was looking for my other one too. The first PowerPoint I did for this workshop. I couldn't find him in my emails, so now I'm stuck with wala ko guy. Bochte wi ko man ko ele was gut das do kisko ba kidas ya bochte tibasiap tide obul gelu sign just na de wa on das one. So I guess the history, especially powwows out here in our territory, they started in New Brunswick. Ozibuktuk was the first powwow, kind of what we would normally see out west. Started in Ozibuktuk in 1987, I think it was 86 or 87. The first powwow started there. It was started by a gentleman by the name of Tom Paul, and he was originally from Escazoni, but he lived out in Nosibuktuk, and or actually he lived in Indian Island, and he was kind of the cornerstone in our powwow movement out here in the East Coast. So let me forward that. Let me back up a little bit. Powwows are not traditionally miigama. That's something that we have adopted from our where he got his teachers from Sonny Ojibwe out in Ontario. And the further west you go, it seems to be well, it's their culture out there, and powwows out there are so huge, and it's a part of it's a big part of everybody's lives out that way. So we kind of adopted those powwows, and we kind of and that's what I'm going to talk about is a lot how we made them Mi'kmaq. We have the powwows out here are so different compared to the powwows out west that we incorporate a lot of our own culture and a lot of our own things and how we do things in this area. So powwows originally come from the west in about 1987, 86, 87. They started to come around here almost every weekend back then anyways. It was starting to come around. Actually, in 1987, the first powwow happened actually, and it was in Halifax under the bridge, under the what was it, McKay Bridge, Africa. There's a park there, and there was at that time I think it was late Sarah Denny who was kind of organizing that powwow, and that was kind of like the first powwow that we see here today, a modern powwow we see today. Later on that year, Elsibuktuk started to have their own powwow, and then they're the longest running powwow in our territory. Fast forward maybe 4 or 5 years, in '92, Eskazoni started to do a powwow, Pictou Landing started to do a powwow, and I think Shubi started to do a powwow. And now from the beginning of June, right up until the 1st of October, there's a powwow every weekend. Sometimes there's 2 or 3 powwows in a weekend, all across our territory. So almost every community hosts a powwow on a weekend in our territory, all the way from Newfoundland right up until the Gaspé, and also including the Malsi, the Wolastoq people, who hold their powwows as well. So kind of when the powwow started here with Tom Paul, it was kind of borrowed from the Ojibwe people, and a lot of those teachings that were going around. It was a revival of our culture. It was a big revival of language, and it was a big revival, especially of the culture. Tom Paul was a residential school survivor, and in this area here, a lot of and I always like to say this because it was the residential school survivors who were really the cornerstone in the cultural revival, the cultural revitalization in this area. If it wasn't for them searching and looking for, to fill that gap in their lives, we wouldn't have these powwows that we see today. So it's a big part of their, achievements, especially in my lifetime. The things that their lasting legacy for revitalizing our culture in our territory. Yeah, and my Aunt Georgina here as well is one of those people. So a lot of the people, as she said, it was a form of their own healing. So they're looking for help for themselves, but also the bigger picture was to educate young people, educate the community, educate our people on who we are. And that's where it really, the foundation of that comes from. Now, when this cultural revitalization was happening with powwows, it started off like a very grassroots style of powwow. There wasn't too much structure in the sense when I'm looking at this as a lens from the outside. It wasn't so much structure. Drum groups would sing for half an hour straight. Sometimes they would sing 4 or 5 songs, and that's all they knew was 4 or 5 different songs. When it first started off, it was very, very, let's say, lack of structure. But then in those times, that's what was needed. That's what was really, really needed for people to express themselves, express their culture. But also, it went down deep into their spirituality. That's something that has a huge gray area today. And I'll try to explain it as best as I can. But when it comes down to it, it comes down to everybody's individual spirituality when it comes to powwow. So today, powwows, you see, are more, I would call them community celebrations. A celebration of culture, a celebration of language, a celebration of song and dance. Sometimes they're on some powwows, for example, I can only speak on behalf of Eskazoni powwow, is more of a festival rather than an official powwow. Usually a festival has a lot of more entertainment, more than just powwow. There's a lot of bands, stage acts, and that's kind of the difference between a festival, what you see. When you go kind of out west more, they do a lot of that as well. In our area here, we're still evolving to modernize powwows. So, and I was talking about how powwows used to be very, very unstructured. They were very, very open, and they did whatever, basically whatever they wanted to do, in the sense that the drums would sing for a half hour, or sometimes they'd sing longer. Today, there's a lot of structure in how we do powwows in our gatherings, and how we organize powwows. Powwows can be, I guess, itemized as two different ways. We call a traditional powwow and what we call a contest powwow or a competition powwow. Those are the kind of two, this pan-indigenization of powwow culture today. There's kind of two categories. So traditional powwow, more or less, is a powwow where there is no competition. It's all just a celebration of dance and song, of getting together, feasting, and sometimes there's ceremony involved in that. Where versus competition powwow, where it's more rigid and more structured. There's different categories, and there's prize money given. Going back to a traditional powwow, there is money given, we call an honorarium, which kind of helps people, with some travel dollars. Sometimes they make some money as well for their time. It's not a lot of money, trust me, and my brother Peter here knows good that life. We've traveled all over the place. We've gone to Ontario with little or to no money, and that life is can be difficult. So sometimes when you go to these traditional powwows, a few extra dollars is good. It help us out quite a bit. These contest powwows, though, sometimes you go and compete for some big money. There's only two contest powwows out here in the East Coast. One is Eskazoni, that's the longest running, and then now Millbrook. Millbrook is they're doing they did a contest last year, and they're going to continue that. So contest is where each dance category, age categories, they dance basically for points, and they place or they don't place. So you place first, second, third, fourth, fifth, whatever, how many places. You get paid based on what you place. That's not the case for traditional powwows, where you don't normally do that. Now, back in the, I guess, and I know a lot of people are, but I guess when I was growing up, and things that I remember, even before we had powwows, we had Mawiomi, and one of the times was at Winter Carnival in Eskazoni. And they would just going off on my memory, is they would dance, they would sing on the stage. They would only do gojua. There wasn't really what we see with powwow, how we see it today. So our people and our culture is not stagnant. We can look back and see how things were in the past. We can continue that, but also culture is not meant to be stagnant, it's not meant to be still, it's meant to evolve. So today, the huge evolution in our cultural revitalization is powwows, and how a lot of our own youth, especially young people, are gravitating towards that powwow, those dances, that singing, as a part of their own identity, which kind of ties into why our residential school survivors started that movement in the first place, was to look for that identity, to look for that culture, to look for that healing. So a lot of our young people are trying to look for something for their own identity. Myself, as I guess as a powwow MC, when I do powwows, I work powwows all the way from here to every, almost every community I've been in now. I'm one of maybe three, maybe, well, there's only two others that will be able to speak Mi'kmaq. All the other powwow MCs, they don't. Only Louise will be there. So when I get the opportunity to be on the mic and I talk, and I try to incorporate Mi'kmaq language in everything that I do. And I think it's very important to be able to try to explain something that's going on at the powwow in Mi'kmaq, which I believe is so important, because to dance and to sing is one part, but language has to play a big part in all that as well. I'm gonna do some self-promotion. I'm not good at self-promotion because you see, my drum group, we just released a new CD, and I heard one time when I was growing up, and some people said, how come you guys are singing those Cree songs and singing those Ojibwe songs? You're singing in a different language. And we stopped and said, no. Every one of these songs here are Mi'kmaq songs in our language, in Mi'kmaq language. I made 3 or 4 of the songs on this, all in Mi'kmaq, and that's the main thing. I said, we don't just copy what we hear out west. I said, we make it our own. We make it these songs are our own songs, and that's a part of my drum group and our own commitment to our language. Like I said, I'm very lucky and fortunate that my parents spoke Mi'kmaq and taught me. In turn, a lot of the singers on our drum group here still speak the language as well. So it's very, very important. We're talking about culture. We're incorporating our own language and our own culture, and making it very, very modern in a sense. See, that was my bit of self. They're $20 too if you want to support my drum group. We'll deal with that at the end. So that's one thing. So when we would do traditional powwows, competition powwows, our own old school Mawiomi, and how we would get together. The one thing that I've noticed throughout my travels all across our territory and going into southern Ontario, especially with the Mohawk and Six Nations, going to their powwows and everywhere in between. The one thing I did notice, and what makes Mi'kmaq powwows my favorite, and no matter where you go, that's what happens. You feed the people. You feed them. No matter what, competition powwow out here or traditional powwow, you feed them. And from my travels, in Ontario, United States, and all around here, that's one thing that Mi'kmaq people have not lost, is that sense of feeding your visitors, your guests that come into your community. You make sure that you fed them, whether it's supper or breakfast or whatever, what have you. And that's what makes it so unique about our territory here, and how important food is for our people. We went to a powwow one time in Ontario. It was a contest powwow, and we got the shaft, as I'll call it. And we didn't place in the drum contest, even though I think we should have, but we didn't. We're not going to argue with that. So we left, we went home. The thing was, we had enough money to get there, and we had just enough money to get back home. And it was the point where, this is where I find very important, I said, before you leave anybody, you feed them, right? They didn't do that. And that's something that we really I'm proud of here in our territory, because every community you go to, Every powwow you go to out here, they'll feed you. And that's the big difference, I think, when it comes to powwows versus out west and here. That's one of the main things. And that's, like I said, I can only speak for Christmas only powwow. And that's one thing that we talk about. It's expensive to feed, upwards to 1,000 people a day, and we try to accommodate that for our own people here, especially in Escazona. Now, feasting is one thing. You go to powwows out west, and this is huge taboo out here. Is you pay at the gate to get in. That's huge taboo. See, everybody's like, what? Oh, wow! You have to pay, whether it's a contest powwow or a traditional powwow. When you leave this area, you have to pay to get in. Now that's something here. If we tried that here, everybody will be at the gate and just arguing wanting to get in, but it just doesn't work like that out here. That kind of, and that goes back to some of the things that we look at for our own people, especially for our own people. What's the good and what's kind of like, well, not that good. So we realize that, well, if you charge them at the gate, you're not going to get the crowd, for one. To pay to get to see something cultural, I guess as a spectator, is not necessarily a good thing. So out here in the East Coast, the main difference I find, like I said, is the food and not being able to pay at the gate. Some powwows you go to, you can buy a bracelet and you'll get in free all weekend. Sometimes that bracelet costs $40 to get in all weekend. Sometimes powwows charge you $20 a day to go inside and just to be a spectator. When you go out west, that's kind of the big thing, where these huge contest powwows, where first place for a drum contest is sometimes $15,000. Sometimes for the dance contest it's $2,000, and you got 10 places. You're looking at a drum or a contest powwow that's giving away $200,000, versus when you come to our area, if you're going to a traditional powwow, you're lucky to get $50 per dancer. So. Of course, out that way, of course, they're going to have any way to get some kind of get their money back somehow. That's one way to look at it. But I feel that powwows out here in our territory are more community, and that's very important. When you look at community, you look at how people get together, and that goes again as we do, feasts and people getting together to talk about their culture, talk about traditions. Very, very important that we share those teachings that we have. So what I'm gonna because I wasn't really too sure on how we were going to, or how I was going to go today. I brought a drum, and this is kind of a different drum. It's not a hand drum. It's not a big powwow drum. It looks like a mini version of a powwow drum. I like to use it when I do things like this and to sing. Now, there's a song that I don't know if Julian is here. He was here today. He was singing. I don't know if he was here. Julian Wells. He made this song 15 years ago, maybe about that. And we call it a contemporary song, a contemporary powwow song. It has words, basically. It's not a ceremonial song. And I think it's fitting. That we're at a language conference to kind of sing it. And the words are Gelukna Unui Sultijib Mijiwajish. That's all the words. There's nothing else to it. And I'll sing it to you because I think that's important, but also show the difference between what I call contemporary and I guess traditional song. I think let's close the door.
Okay. So.
I don't want to be.
Yeah, ruin every other
disturb
session.
anybody else
Yeah.
because I'm kind of loud. I've been singing since 2002, but I've been singing traditional songs my life. But powwow I've been singing for a long time. And I couldn't find a small drumstick this morning. I was looking where our house was. We had an oil spill at Niganama, so I couldn't find all my things have been moved, so I couldn't find it. I found this big powwow drumstick, and it'll do. I said. I'll sing this song, and kind of just to provide an example of some of the singing and how we incorporate our language in a very modern and contemporary way in regards to powwow. When I talk about, and a lot of people don't know this very much, but we do sing our own powwow songs in our language. And that's one of the main things that I when I do things like this, I try to talk about, because there's a lot of people that might be a little confused, thinking that we might sing in Cree, although there are some songs I know in Cree, and some songs I know in Ojibwe and whatever languages. But we also honor our own language when we do things like this. When we sing powwow, and when we do powwow, we really incorporate a lot of our own language, a lot of our own culture in the things, in what we do. That was only one example of 14 that I know. Actually, that song there isn't on that album. That's on our first album, and it's just an example that we have to talk about. You know, some of the things that we sing, and we sing about anything. Sometimes I know songs that sing about hunting. I know the songs that talk about the dancers, about the day, how it looks outside, the weather. When we sing, we don't necessarily just sing about what happens at a powwow or what you see. Maybe it's something that happens in regular day-to-day life. I know there's a song, I don't know it, but I've heard it and I know about it. And in Ojibwe, it's the longest word in their language. And I heard the song, and it's a fairly long song. It's the longest word in their language, and it means blueberry pie. That's all they're saying, is blueberry pie. Like, it just sounds really good. It's a good song. So that when we sing powwow, I'm almost using this because right here it says, the lyrics of the song are written there, so that if people don't understand what we sing, people can always refer back and look at this and see what we're saying. I don't have the English lyrics, just the Mi'kmaq lyrics. And that song I sang, Gilok na Olnui Sulchi Miwajish, it just means it's good for the children or the young people to speak the language. That's all it means. So it has a little, a little intent behind it. And when my bro Julian made that song, that was the intent, because he himself is a non-speaker, but he makes Mi'kmaq songs. It's something very important, he has a really good ear, and he asks a lot of questions. He asks me a lot of questions. He asks my family a lot of questions on what how you would say a word, or how would you say it. And he makes songs, and we'll sit there and we'll go through them together to make sure he got the proper pronunciation or the proper tense, to make sure that the song, the meaning behind the song, the words, make sense. Now that was only one example of hundreds of Mi'kmaq powwow songs that even I know of. When we sing kind of what we call old school, there's no words. It's just like almost like a chanting. And when I'm put on the spot, I can never remember songs. So when every other time, I'm like, yes, I know that song. There's a song here. It comes from Manitoba. It was given to us by my buddy. His name is Carl. And this is what I call a straight song. There's no words in it. I'm gonna stop myself. Hold on, gracias, okay?
Bring back Arnold.
Was that?
Bring back Arnold.
Arnold might remember it. Now, when we did powwows, I guess growing up, and I know my cousins, the sets, and were very, very, my father included, and very, very key in Unamagi, but more specifically in Eskazoni, to ensuring that the powwow would continue on, but also to allow change, to allow evolution of because when you look at the powwow now, especially the powwows in this area, and you go back 20 years, they don't look anything near that they used to look like. So they're changing. They're still constantly changing today. A lot of the teachings that we have to run a powwow come from out west, but they also have a Mi'kmaq twist to them. When I talk about earlier, I said that there's a huge gray area, and I think that I'll finish off with this little piece, because even for myself, where I draw the line between what's social and what's ceremonial, it's individual. So growing up, we were taught that powwow was this huge, big ceremony, huge. It is a spiritual event for sure. My views today are very different from what I see powwow. And the main thing is because there's a lot of money involved. When there's money involved, to me, sometimes causes a little bit more friction. We'll leave it at that. Call it friction. And when it comes down to that, where do you draw the line? Where what's ceremonial and what's not? Because we, as a ceremonial person myself, when we do a ceremony, you never charge for money. There's no money involved whatsoever in ceremony because it causes corruption, and we don't want that. But when it comes to powwows where there is money involved, see, this is where I call the gray area. Where do we, I guess on this path, how far can you veer off this path before it becomes something that it shouldn't become? So this is where something we have conversation, especially on social media, where sometimes it's not the best place to have that kind of conversation. Because a lot of people, like I said, like myself, that go almost every weekend, powwow, I go somewhere for powwow almost every weekend. I've already been to a couple down in the States. Starting usually the 1st of June. So where do you draw the line where your own individual spirituality? That's important because we all, as older people, are spiritual people, whether you recognize it or not. There's something a part of our own culture that we participate in. But that line, where do we draw that line about what's ceremonial and what isn't? Because like I said, when we were growing up, we were taught that powwow was ceremonial. It's a huge ceremonial event. Where today now, things happen at powwows, I'll talk about it. We were taught that, you're supposed to be sober. We were taught that, but you go to a powwow now, sometimes it's a big party. So where do we, as people, we draw the line about the spirituality. So today, for myself anyways, I look at powwow as more social. And that's where I've come to peace with that. Some people still believe that it's ceremonial. That's okay. It's a part of their own ceremony. Some people don't look at it as spiritual at all, but more of gigs, more of making a few dollars. And that's okay because our people are very, very entrepreneuristic, selling baskets and understanding anyways for myself that powwows are more social, that they should be held as social events rather than ceremonial events. Now there could be ceremonies that happen after the powwow, sweat lodges, pipe ceremonies or whatever. I know in Eskazone, we still have a sacred fire. We like the sacred fire along with the pipe ceremony. So there's some ceremonial aspects to it, but in the whole self, the gathering in itself is more a social gathering. And to know the difference is very important so that people, like I said, conversations happen online might not necessarily happen, or in the sense that people's feelings might not get hurt. Now, the main difference I always see is powwow, you can go and snag. You guys know what snagging is? For those of you who don't know what snagging is you go out and you find a honey for the night. Woo! That's snagging, okay? It could be for the night, could be for the weekend, it could be, and then, it could be more than, it could become more than something, but whatever. And when you go to a ceremony, you can't do that. That's a big no-no. So that's how I look at it as, and that's you can't snag. You go to when you go to Big Cove, they have a Sundance in Big Cove. It's on the full moon of July, and if you ever did that there, they will shun you and kick you out. Literally, they'll drag you out. You can't do that kind of stuff when you're at a ceremony. Ceremony is for one thing only, and that's prayer. See, and that's how I've kind of found the difference. When you go to a powwow, you can meet somebody that's not your cousin. Basically, what it is, and I think that's what. And we can't do that, like us here in Unamagi, being, especially when I'm from Eskazone. My family came to Eskazone. I'm away on my watch. Like, you can go back and trace your family. There's still family in Botodek, there's still family in Wegoha. My father's family is from Eskazone, but my mother's family is from Wegoha. My grandmother's from Wegoha. We were centralization in the 40s. So when we leave our community, we go to different areas to a different powwow. You meet people. So that's one of the things about powwows are that just happens. It naturally happens. You can't do that at a ceremony. And if I was able to talk about that and without getting people upset about what the difference between a ceremonial and a social is, you know, I like to use that example so that people can kind of understand. You know, you don't go to church to go meet somebody, you know what I mean? You just don't do that. It's just unethical. So, you know, so that's kind of how I like to talk about it. Especially, you know, knowing the difference between what's ceremony and what's not ceremony. Even though it does have ceremonial aspects, ceremonial objects, you know, the power of that drum, you know, that spirit, because we don't look at this as an instrument, we look at it more as a spirit, that it has a voice, it has a sound. It's very much alive like us, spiritually. So the powwows do have ceremonial aspects to it, spiritual aspects to it. It's up to us as people to kind of figure out where you can draw that line. So I guess with that, if anybody has any questions, you guys are a keener bunch. I said they're very.
Just one there.
Yeah.
When you were mentioning when you compete for money,
yeah.
Do you have to pay a registration?
Yeah. Some powwows do that, and some don't. I know in Eskasoni we do have a fee. I don't know what it is. It's $20 or something like that. And what that usually goes in towards is like I said, every powwow has its own ways that can go back to kind of offset the cost of the powwow. For us, we give it out after. Usually, when we do our powwow was 100% band run. We might try to write a couple proposals for 20,000. They'll give us 1,000. And that seems to happen quite a bit. There's no core funding for powwows. We tried. So I know, for example, Eskasoni, we put in a lot of money, average $100K a year on our contest powwow to bring everything that we do. Some powwows don't. Some powwows only put maybe 20,000 traditional powwows, right? But see, that's the first time we did contest powwow, we were close to 200,000, close. But we had $100,000 funding from the province, one time, and we've been trying ever since.
That was a year Trudeau was trying to.
So it's kind of so for like that kind of cultural events, there's no funding for it. It's I think the most you can apply for is 10,000, and that's through the Nova Scotia. I know is the Nova Scotia Heritage. They fund that kind of stuff. You just got to do jump through a lot of holes. But when it comes back to your original question, you do have to pay a fee normally. Some contest powwows, they very rarely you don't have to. But especially down in the States, like the university powwows, they have small contest powwows, which $200 or $300 first place. They'll waive the fee. Where you go towards these big contest powwows, especially out west, you might have to pay $40 a day so $80 for the weekend. That's your fee. That's what you pay, and there's 200 or 300 dancers in your category alone. So I mean, that's the powwows that have first place $2,000, and the best dancers in all across Indian country go to it. So I guess when you go to traditional powwows, there's no fee. They'll give you day money, which is sometimes $20. I've driven really far for $20 once. Gas was only 80 cents though. So is there any more questions? Yeah.
Usually more.
Usually, how much go biscuit dollars in? But that's a part of how they do things out west. Yeah, very, very different. Which is I'm very happy for. So if there's any more questions? for